like over talk on this mic and scream and everybody will, you know. Okay, well thank you guys for coming. I know there's probably some more people filtering in. My name is Steve Dugan, here to talk about some of the problems with BGP. A few of the faces out there I recognize from the class that I ran earlier this week, the Hacking Cisco Networks class. So thank you guys for putting up with me for another half an hour or hour or whatever. You know. Okay, so let's see. Here's what I'm here to talk about today. I'm going to talk about some of the problems with BGP. Reasons why BGP exists. I threw a couple basics about BGP. Obviously, I'm not expecting to teach you guys BGP in the matter of, an hour. It's kind of not the point. But I did, take some, I took the level of the BGP talk down a bit. So if you're a BGP expert in the room, understand that I'm trying to give this information out to everybody so they can understand it. So there's some things that, I took a little bit of liberty with that, maybe there are a few more things might have to happen underneath. But certainly everything here is plausible. Another thing that you'll note is I made some changes last night to the slides. All the text that's in there is right, but when you get to the diagrams, I've modified all those. They have animations and everything, and they put it up on the Black Hat website, so if you guys want to go grab it. It should be out there now. If it's not out there, it'll be there any minute. So if you guys want to see those. All right, so some of the topics, like I said, Bgp Basics. We're going to talk about the flaws of BGP. How can we redirect traffic or do something to the traffic as it's traversing through a BGP autonomous system? And some of the potential solutions with the secure version of BGP that is still in draft form and nobody's implementing and there's no code for yet, and we're kind of in the situation, a situational quandary of, well, when are we going to ever have a chance to implement this? So, all right, so who cares? BGP is one of the central core parts of the internet as it is today. Without BGP, we don't have the internet because it carries all of the routing and reachability information for every network that's out there. Without that information, the internet just simply doesn't run. That and, lots of Starbucks coffee, right? BGP is nothing more than a really complex version of RIP. RIP works very simply by counting, hop count from router to router to router. Anybody who's done anything with TCP/IP knows how RIP works. But BGP operates really the same way. The difference is with BGP is it enumerates the hops by giving a value to each hop with an autonomous system number as it goes through each autonomous system. So it has a path back to the advertised network. There's a lot of other things within BGP, all these different attributes and things we can do to force routing to go different directions, things like local preference and wait and med. But for the most part, it boils down to a hop count type scenario, just like RIP. One of the main issues with BGP as it is that it's built upon this assumption of trust. I have to trust the guy that I'm attached to give me correct information so that I can make my routing decisions. Okay? If that information is tampered in any way, it may be difficult for me to verify that it's been tampered with or changed. The current version of BGP, as the story goes, a lot of the guys at Cisco, a lot of the guys from other vendors all got together and figured out all the problems with BGP, the current implementation of BGP, sat down at a cafe somewhere, drew all the things up that they wanted to change, went back, coded it up, and implemented it, and then wrote the RFC afterwards. Which, maybe that's what has to happen now. But this napkin is rumored to be sitting up at Cisco's building frame somewhere at one of the Cisco San Jose offices. So I know I might have people from Cisco that might be able to verify that. Okay, so other issues with BGP that we're running into is there's a lot of administrative denial of service attacks. This is my term that I'm coining here, ADOS. This was a distributed denial of service. This is when you mess up yourself. You as the administrator type something in and oops, I just took out somebody else's network. This happens still today with BGP. A denial of service attack against BGP specifically, and there haven't been a whole lot of them out there, and certainly this isn't, thank goodness it isn't something the script kiddies have access to, and there's some tool that says nuke autonomous system and a whole portion of the internet goes away. Not that that couldn't be written. Please, nobody in here write that. But it could have the potential of knocking everything out, or big parts. Securing the implementation of BGP as it exists right now, we've been dealing with it for several years. Ever since it was drawn up on the napkin, we knew it was insecure. We started looking at ways to fix it, but it's taking too long. So kind of the idea behind this talk is I want to show all the problems with the BGP and kind of educate everybody the idea of you can't trust it, you can't trust what's going on, and we've got to do something about it. And the people who are really working hard on it are running out of funding because nobody's supporting them. And if we don't do something now, it's going to break eventually. All right. The security mechanisms we have within BGP, which are really MD5 between neighbors, most ISPs, will say it's too difficult to implement. It's just a password. You can't put a password on your neighbor statement. I mean, come on. But when you think about having 5,000, other autonomous systems you might, potentially be connecting to, or that many neighbors, and those changes on a day-to-day basis with policy of, I want to change my passwords every, X number of days, it could be difficult to implement. Well, it's still not a good excuse. It still should be implemented. All right, so this is some BGP basics, and for those of you who know all this stuff, bear with me. A BGP prefix is just simply a route. It's a subnet, network, or aggregate of networks which represent one entry within the BGP routing table. An autonomous system is a group of networks that are under a single administrative control. So we're talking about one ISP, for instance, that have control over their entire network, have control over the traffic within their network, and can do with it whatever they want with it while it's there. The nice thing to do would be to send it off to somebody else appropriately to where it's supposed to be going, but you could do anything you want with it. Each of these autonomous systems are given a number. There's a 2-byte number, 0 to 65,535, value assigned to each autonomous system. So as BGP routes are sent through, we, again, enumerate each of them by their autonomous system number. Also, within the autonomous system numbering scheme, there are some private AS numbers that are given out, very similar to 10, 172, 192 IP address ranges that aren't supposed to be sent out on the internet, even though a lot of people still try and send it out. 65,000, I think it's like 64,512, and up are considered private autonomous system numbers. So if you're wondering why I'm using like 192 and 6,500 numbers in my presentations, because I want to protect the innocent type thing. Anybody coming back to me and saying, oh, you're talking about my network. Okay, I talked about the AS path hop count thing. All right, how big is BGP? And these are estimates because it changes on a day-to-day basis, but somewhere around 12,000 routers are currently running BGP. Now, not all of these routers have to have the full-blown BGP table, and you can run BGP on a little 2500 series router, but it's not going to run the whole thing. It doesn't have enough memory. But you could use it for just carrying a static default route, or just carrying the default route off to your ISPs, or maybe a few routes, but certainly not. You'd need about 128 megs, maybe even at a minimum, just to carry the entire routing table. Looking at the routing table, you'll see 6,500 autonomous systems currently running BGP that are visible. I know that there are around 10,000 that have been given out. So 10,000 of the numbers have been given out. Where the other roughly 4,000 have gone, who knows? People are just holding on to them, using them internally, not sending them out anywhere, or just paying their fee every year so they can eventually one day use this autonomous system. So the number of 130,000 networks currently listed in the routing table. It's a lot of networks. It's a lot of things to worry about looking through piece by piece and seeing if they're correct. About 18,000 paths, and most of these paths are only 3 or 4 AS hops long. Some of them are longer, but that only equates to about 5% of the prefixes that are seen. There is no hierarchy with the way BGP is built. Kind of the whole idea when DARPA originally funded the project is there shouldn't be any kind of hierarchy to where one particular portion goes down and everything can self-heal and go around it. So by that token, you could build it and attach as you needed to whichever ISPs you wanted to connect to, multi-home up, and now you're attached to the internet as a whole. This does create some problems with solving some of our issues with BGP, but it needs to stay this way. We really don't want to create a hierarchy within BGP. There are a couple ways to specifically run BGP, and actually there's three, but that's external BGP and internal BGP. So external BGP is specifically run between your autonomous system and another autonomous system. It's important to note this because a lot of the things we talk about security-wise with BGP and things you could do, the potential or possibilities of doing route injection, eBGP is a lot more difficult to do anything like that, considering it's directly attached in 99% of the cases. Because of that direct attachment, you really can't get anything in between there to do much, but not saying it couldn't be done. iBGP is run inside of your autonomous system between all of your internal routers. Okay? And that doesn't carry the requirement of being directly attached. Okay? So a lot of times it's going to use an underlying IGP, like OSPF or EIGRP, or pick one, to carry all the BGP, TCP 179 messages between all the BGP speaking routers in your AS. Okay, so BGP updates. It's important to note that BGP is certainly not used to carry end user traffic. It's just there to make sure the routing information is carried by all the routers. These update messages sent between BGP neighbors are there so that, if there's a change, and there's changes all the time considering the size of the internet, when there's a change, we receive the message and process it accordingly. Once we have the update information, we determine the best path. Well, best path in BGP is like this huge 13, 15 step, process. We look through everything, compare it. Usually it comes down to longest AS path, but there's a lot of other factors we can throw in there. And we have control, once it's in our autonomous system, we have control over how we decide the deterministic properties of best path. We could determine it based on, our bandwidth within our network and, kind of weight things so that, things going out our T3 over here, we use our T3 more than the one T1 backup we have going out of our network. So we have some options there. Again, though, most cases it comes down to AS path hop count. All right, so now some of the major BGP flaws. BGP makes some pretty bad assumptions. Okay? An autonomous system is responsible to advertise or withdraw the prefixes it has been assigned. Fair enough. You're given a network. You have the sole responsibility to make sure that you advertise your network and nobody else's network. Great. Well, if you advertise somebody else's network, we have a potential problem, right? So when receiving an update, you have to assume your neighbor is advertising only the stuff that he's supposed to be sending. Now, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. So everybody has implemented some form of filtering to make sure the people they're connected to are only advertising the networks that they're supposedly owning. As we get into larger and larger ISPs, these filters become ridiculous to manage. They become very difficult to deal with. And how hard is it, if you really wanted to spoof an email to somebody working at an ISP and say, hey, I just bought this /24, can you please update your filter so I can advertise it? Whoops, that belongs to somebody else, darn. So because there's a human element involved, somebody has to put those filters in place. All right, so within an AS path, the first listed AS is the originating autonomous system. Okay? So that's where the network came from. Can that be modified? As the information is going through your autonomous system, sure, you could modify it. And if you modify that information, the next person is going to have a real hard time figuring it out via any filtering mechanism that you modified the autonomous system path. Because of these assumptions, and there's a few other things in here, BGP is going to be vulnerable to a lot of things we can do, a lot of route manipulation attacks, black holes where I advertise routes that don't belong to me and bring all the traffic in, throw it away. Can we write denial of service attacks specifically against BGP? Sure. Have they been written? Yes. Are they widely known? No. Thank goodness. You could also wiretap. Somebody was just telling me in my class that somebody discovered that all their traffic leaving their autonomous system was going out to China and coming back. Okay. That would kind of raise some red flags, right? And then we could also we just do some server masquerading, pretend to be someone we're not. Okay, so this global problem comes with, the fact that every single BGP router running, all 12,000 some odd of them, they're all vulnerable. Now, these vulnerabilities come from implementation flaws, human errors in implementation, bugs within the code themselves, or simply because of the fact that somebody has to make changes to them. You could talk somebody into walking over and consoling in and configuring something for you and making changes. Because there's a human element involved, and if that ever is going to be fixed, I don't know, but because the physical access is always there, a potential threat, we could make modifications. Now, any compromised BGP router can be used to attack resources in other autonomous systems. Why is this so bad? Well, how do you defend yourself against these kind of attacks? What do I set up? My IDS and my firewall at my end to make sure that nobody along the way, somewhere in between, starts stealing and looking at my traffic? There's no defense that I can set up for my company to make sure that somebody else doesn't modify the traffic or look at the traffic or do anything to it on the way, or send it off to a server that looks just like mine. And I mentioned the filtering problem. It's there, people use it, and it works, but it's subject to error. People make mistakes, and those mistakes can be costly to a lot of other companies out there because of their mistakes. Somebody of 12,000 routers, how many of them out there do you think have the password Cisco or San Fran or San Jose, which are the passwords they teach in all the Cisco classes? Right? And there's also management stations out there to control, set up to control BGP, which makes it, one more step of, one more thing we can go after and try and attack to grab control of BGP routers. Okay, so some examples of redirecting traffic. Any questions so far? Yes, sir. Essentially route filters to make sure that, I'm sorry, he asked what kind of filters can be put in place for BGP. The type of filters we're looking for are route filters to make sure that based on the neighbor, the information coming in, that they're only advertising the routes that they're allowed to send. Okay. Okay, the question is there's technology there, not to do it dynamically, and that's one of the problems. Okay? If we have the ability to maintain a routing table that's 130 routes large, why is it we can't implement a dynamic filtering solution to make it a little bit easier?
Well, there is the RADP, but not
I'm sorry.
There is the RADP.
Right. Yeah, he's mentioning the RADP, but although Europe is starting to use it more, here in the States it's not being used hardly at all. I'm sorry? Yeah, only cable and wireless are really using that system, which is good, but it needs to be widespread throughout the entire. It needs to be mandated that this type of system, or some type of system in that case, is being used. Okay, so any other questions before I continue on here? Make sure I'm not going too fast.
If the filters that most large ISPs do implement the filters, are you saying that there are specific known problems with those filters today?
I'm not saying, the question is, are there problems with the filtering mechanisms that are in place? The filtering mechanisms, if they're done properly, do work. But doing it properly when there's 130 routes and the potential of things in their place, and there's some things you just can't filter for. Okay? If you're a transit autonomous system connecting to another transit autonomous system, and the origin may not necessarily, the origin autonomous system may not be changed, but somewhere else has been changed within the autonomous system, you can't really check that effectively. Okay? So enough said. Any other questions before I go on? Okay. All right, so why would we attack Bgp? Because it's vulnerable. Right? Because no one else has really gone after it heavily yet. Right? We've all hit the Windows servers and the clients and the Linux servers because we have those sitting on our desks and we can play with it all day long until we find something that's broken. Right? Not all of us have a 7200 series router sitting on our desk that we can play around with and hammer all day and find out if there's flaws there. So I guess that might be an advantage, but there is weaknesses to Bgp, and they're going to be exploited. Some of them already have been. All right, so as we can see, the impact can go all the way from one single network on the internet to the potential of a global level problem with Bgp. Imagine if somebody wrote the equivalent to the NIMDA or code red type worm and specifically attacked the Bgp routers on the internet. Don't get any ideas, FX. Too late. I said it. Okay, so what else can we do? We can redirect traffic. We can wiretap the traffic, look at it, modify it along the way. We can black hole traffic as it comes into our autonomous system, just don't send it anywhere. Session hijacking, all the way down to server masquerading, taking over your local bank's web server and watching all the stuff come in. I especially like this idea. What happens if some company, I'm not going to mention any names, were to release a brand new patch for their product, and you were to masquerade their server and backdoor all their patches? Not a very nice thing to do. And of course, we have the ability to deface websites with this, but with the potential of doing so many other things, it seems almost childish to do that. Okay, now here's where I start making some changes to the slides. I have a whole bunch of examples. These are all the example companies I'm going to be using in my my diagram, so I'll give you guys a chance to look these over. I have a bank, bsbank.com, okay. An ISP specifically dedicated to spam, spewing porn, adware, mortgages, spam. Fictional University, FU. We have We Spy, Intercept, and Spoof Packet, the Wispy ISP, the Backbone Gunners, BB Gun, and then the small service provider, Keep It Simple Stupid, which is KISS AS. Okay, so here's what our network's going to look like, and here's some of the attacks we can pull off. Okay. The first one's going to be our administrative denial of service. This is one that we could do to ourselves. So, first thing we do is we're having a problem up here at our fictional university. And to solve our problem, we're clearing out our BGP neighbor relationships. Maybe we're trying to implement a new policy of some kind, set up communities. You think of something. So we do clear IP BGP splat, which clears all our neighbor relationships. Wait for those neighbor relationships to come back up. We do it again. There's something within BGP that's been implemented in the last few years to keep things like this from happening. Because what's happening here is that we're flapping our routes. You may not necessarily notice this, but what we're doing is we're telling our neighbors that we're no longer there. And then we're saying, hey, we're back again. So we're withdrawing and re-advertising our routes over and over. That reflects and continues throughout the entire internet, that this route flap is occurring. Well, if you do that enough, and if it's configured by default, it's only 3 flaps, what's going to happen is the upstream connections are going to dampen, if they have it so configured, they're going to do BGP dampening. And depending on the length of your prefix, that BGP dampening could effectively wipe out your network for about a half an hour. So in this case, we're using a /24. Nobody's going to be able to get to us, or we're not going to be able to send out, receive traffic back for half an hour. Oops. Now, you could do that this way, as I mentioned, just by doing clear IP BGP splat, which I've seen people do many a times, and having to explain that to a CEO of the company that why you're off the network for half an hour can be a bit of a pain. But I've also seen situations where you're putting new code on the router, load new iOS, reboot, comes back up, crashes, goes back down, you bring up the new code. So 3 times within 10 minutes, you had to reset this box and you get dampened. So that can be an issue. And usually, you know, in those cases, you want to make sure you talk to your ISPs or your upstream providers and say, look, if I, you know, give me a little leeway here. If I drop, you know, maybe 4 or 5 times, dampen me, but not on 3, because that could, you know, potentially create a problem. Now, how could we use this type of system against BGP itself? Well, we could do one of the many ideas for doing a DOS attack for BGP. We could simply attack one of the routers running BGP, and you're going to have the same effect, right? So we find some exploit that's out there, specifically attacking a BGP router. Like, say, we find out it's running SSH, and we just pummel it with SSH traffic, which there's a few versions of iOS, several really, that are vulnerable to an SSH attack, and we'll crash the box. So we do that. Router goes down, comes back up, we do it again. Router goes down, comes back up, we do it again. Same thing happens, right? The same equivalent of, you know, us doing clear IP BGP. Upstream providers with dampening turned on, reflect the information out to the rest of the internet, and none of our traffic gets out. So we wait a half an hour, and then we do it again, effectively keeping them down, you know, until they fix the problem. Okay, now I was dying to put this up in a slide somewhere. Okay. So now we're going to turn our fictional university into a autonomous system black hole. I had to shorten the title down, so you know. At least I got a couple laughs, so now I feel okay. All right, so in this case, the bank over here, this is their real network. Okay, router BGP 65,000 and network 192.168.0.0. Okay. That's their Class C address they're advertising. We are going to accidentally, up at our fictional university, put in this network. We also need to have some kind of static route, because if it's not in the existing routing table, it won't get advertised. So we put this information in. On upstream connections, they just don't happen to be running the right filters, or we call them up and say, hey, we just bought this network. Can you remove your filters to make sure we can advertise this? So in that case, to KISS AS, We Spy ISP, and spam, we're the best path to that network. Now, because we're the best path, any traffic going there, well, comes to us. And since up here we were routing it to null interface, we simply throw it away. Now, the poor bank over here, I mean, this is happening, you know, a ways away from him. What can he do? Call them up, say, you know, could you please stop doing that? You know, call up their upstream ISPs and say, look, you need to put filters in place to make sure this doesn't happen. This is a small case where we're just attacking one particular connection, but there, you know, a few years ago, one ISP in Florida decided to, you know, take out a good portion of every /24 there was on the internet. They took OSPF and they took, well, BGP, and they redistributed BGP into OSPF. Stripped off every single attribute within BGP. And on the other side of their ISP network, in their autonomous system, they redistributed OSPF back into BGP, which made them the origin of all the networks they were redistributing into BGP. Oops. And since nobody was filtering their traffic, pretty much knocked everybody out for a couple hours, I think. Okay, so now we're going to do some wiretapping with BGP. Now, normal traffic going from our KISS autonomous system over here to the bank would go this direction. Okay? Go through We Spy ISP, through our backbone, and then out to the bank. Well, one of the kids at FU started working for We Spy ISP and decided to play around some of his Hacksword tools, you know, just because he saw this slide somewhere on the internet, said, hey, you know what I can do? I can take all of the traffic going to the bank and route that via OSPF. I can subvert all of the BGP properties by changing the administrative distance within OSPF so that this particular route here gets handled by OSPF. We send it off to the OSPF autonomous system boundary router. We tunnel it over to our dorm room. So now the traffic's going up to our dorm room. Once it's here, oops, we put in ethereal, whatever we want to look at, and we can watch the traffic. We send it back over to the bank, of course, so they can see it. But now we can watch all the traffic we want. Right? No problem. Now we're only going one AS hop away. We can go all the way across the internet, as far as we want to with this. As long as that traffic is going through We Spy ISP. It's not going to grab any traffic from any other autonomous system, just the stuff that's here specifically going over to the bank. It also won't grab the traffic going back. So we're going to have one-way traffic, which just so happens to be you're going to the bank and, if they're not using SSL, which I assume they would be, right, we could grab passwords and anything else. Right. Now, if they were running SSL, which I would hope your bank would be, it would be encrypted so we wouldn't be able to watch traffic. Not that we couldn't do any tricks with certificates or anything and send the certificate from our dorm room back to the client and then send it the other way and sit man in the middle that way. But that's beyond what I want to talk about. Okay, so what else could we do here? We do our masquerade attack. Now, a couple methods for masquerade attack. I'm just going to use the things I used before. One was that black hole that we did before. So again, BS Bank is in charge of this particular network. Up at FU, we're going to advertise the same thing. This time we're going to point it out an Ethernet interface of our router up here. And out that Ethernet interface, because we're advertising it and we told our upstream providers to make sure that they're not filtering this advertisement, we're now the best path. And then we put a server in. Now the server has the exact look and feel of the bank. And we can even go so far as, who cares about SSL? Because usually when you go to your bank, you get to the front page, it's not secure. You click on, I want to go to log in, takes you to another page, and that brings up SSL. But since we own the web server up here, we're just going to bring it to a regular web page. Nobody's going to know the difference. Why bother with security, right? So now that we have that, traffic all comes to us. Who's going to check? Maybe people in this room. Most people aren't. Okay? I'm willing to say 2 in 100 might check, might look, and that might be generous. At which point now we can grab their passwords. So we create a database up here and just take all their passwords, make them enter it like 3 times, because every time you go to someplace, we all use different passwords. So the first time you enter it, you get the first password, and then, oh, that didn't work. Oh, right, I used the wrong password. They put some other password in. So now we have all the passwords they use on anything they ever go to, right? And then we send them a message back. Oh, sorry, the bank's down right now. We'll be back in half an hour. Try back again. And we just stop advertising the route. Everything goes back to normal. And has the bank ever know that happen? They might check. Yeah, the traffic will all go away. Especially if we advertise a BGP route. If we were just to tunnel the traffic, like I'll show in the next one, we would just see a small portion of the traffic, or whatever traffic could be traveling through one ISP would go away. So not all of our traffic would disappear. All right, which would be this example. So in this case, again, the traffic was going this direction. We're going to do our same tunnel attack, but this time we're going to advertise it here at We Spy ISP. We still could do the same thing we did before with the OSPF or EIGRP injection by putting the information there. Once you have it, tunnel the traffic up to the dorm room, put our server in, traffic goes our direction, and we have all the passwords. This isn't rocket science. I mean, this is, if you know a little bit about BGP, and it doesn't take that much to realize how absolutely dastardly this could be. Right? And the fact that anybody at any ISP could start doing this. Right? Trusted, untrusted, or not. So what's happening right now? Right now there have been a few attacks against BGP, but they're not getting widespread coverage like they should. As far as administrative denial of service attacks within BGP, about 1% of the routing table entries right now are incorrect. Now, 1%, that's no big deal, right? We talked about 130,000 routes, so that's 1,300 routes are potentially wrong on the internet routing table. Right now, there's been tools specifically targeting BGP demonstrated here at Black Hat. The remote route injection is theoretically possible. FX says it can be done. Not to point you out, dude. But you know, I don't want to see that one come out. I really don't, because when that comes out, we really don't have an answer right today to fix this. This isn't something we can patch tomorrow because somebody comes out with, you know, some worm that goes crazy on the internet. I mean, we have a lot of work to do to get to the point where we could fix this. All right. So some of the potential solutions with SBGP, the things that have been offered up with the internet drafts. First thing is we have to stop trusting the other autonomous systems out there. What happens if you fire somebody and they go work for, you know, your ISP that you're connected to? What could they potentially do to you in revenge? Some ISPs shouldn't be trusted ever. And other small ISPs have the same level of vulnerabilities and the same problems that anybody else has, but without the resources maybe to plug up the holes. So what we need to do is, first off, we need to stop sending BGP messages in the clear. We need to run IPsec between all the BGP neighbors so nobody can look at the traffic as it goes by. Not the user traffic, but just the BGP routing update information. That wouldn't be too much of a stretch. We could do that now with BGP4. One of the big things we need to do is make sure the origin and path information is verified and correct. We need to make sure the person advertising the network has the right to advertise this network. If somebody's summarizing networks along the path, they have to have the right to summarize those networks. What's suggested is we use certificate of authorities and, you know, actually prove that you have the right to use and advertise this, well, not necessarily use, but advertise or withdraw a particular route. The other thing we have to do is it has to be fully integrated with BGP4 as it exists right now. We couldn't expect every ISP in the entire world to all of a sudden, at once, switch over to SBGP, unless we want to, you know, just take the internet down for a couple months. My wife always says, "Steve, the internet's broke." Yeah. Okay, so the other thing we have to make sure is that SBGP can't be, you know, all the rules we put in SBGP can't be easily subjected to a simple, you know, subversion by an IGP or a simple static route. If you're running SBGP, you need to, you know, make sure that something else isn't going to just carry the traffic for it, like OSPF. And that may be one of the hardest parts about SBGP right now. And I'm also we should be carrying all the bog-on routes as a form of dynamic filtering. And what a bog-on route is, that would be 192, 168s, your 172s, your 10s, but also other things like 169, 254, right, which is, you know, our Microsoft clients, all of a sudden, you know, they can't get a DHCP address, so they figure out this IP address that I don't know where it came from. And there's lots of others that, you know, like Class A address space that have never been given out to anybody and nobody's ever going to give it away. Well, maybe someday, but it's just not out there. Why not carry all those and just say route to null? If you get this, just throw it away. And that could be dynamically started up at the highest, you know, route registries and pushed down to everybody else. All right. The issues with SBGP, and this is, you know, the major, you know, the hurdles. It's this complete catch-22. The people writing the software, the developers, can't agree on how to do this. They write the code, but they're not sure anybody's really going to implement it, and they know that they want to get paid to write the code because it's a big undertaking to do all this. The people who are implementing it don't have anything to implement yet, and they don't see anybody else implementing it, so they don't see there's any reason to do it now, and they also don't see the problem because nobody's screaming and yelling and standing up on stage and telling everybody how bad it is. Until today. Well, other people are saying this, but people aren't listening. So there's a big cost here. I mean, we got route registries, we've got, you know, interoperability testing. I mean, BGP alone is a cumbersome thing to implement. Now let's increase the complexity of BGP by a factor of 10. And hand this off to every ISP and everybody who's going to be, you know, implementing this stuff. Unless it's easy to do, and actually the optimal situation would be to make BGP as it exists now easier to implement by implementing secure BGP. If you could do that, then I think a lot of people would jump on the bandwagon. The other problems we're running into are the people who are writing the draft versions and solving the problems are running out of financing. They're running out of funding because people aren't listening. Okay, now I'm probably way ahead, right? How much time do I have left? Oh well. Okay, so in summary, BGP is a critical part of the internet. We can't do without it, but we have to fix it. And when that's going to happen, I don't know. We all have to get together and maybe start helping everybody who's financing this stuff and force everybody to fix it. We really can't wait. I mean, we can't wait to fix it because there isn't going to be an easy solution once somebody really goes after it and attacks it. Okay? We have to be proactive about this, not reactive. Because reactive is going to mean lots and lots and lots of internet commerce dollars lost. Okay? It's going to hit everybody's pocketbook. And I won't be able to check my email. So trust only goes so far. It's just a question of how soon till this is shattered. All right. So chance for question and answers. Yes, sir.
Can you tell me a few properties of a secure BGP system that you would want to run?
Tell you a few properties of secure BGP that I would want to run.
And would there be passwords? Would there be certificates? Would there be an architecture for people signing up to it? Like, what does it look like?
I think the architecture issue would, although the suggestion is that it goes by a certain architecture. Okay, I'm sorry. Did everybody hear this question? I've got to make sure I repeat it. Okay, so he wants to know what type of secure BGP system I would suggest that we run. Personally, I'm not the author of it. I would like to sit on the team and offer my suggestions, but I'm not. But I'm certainly going to make my services available to anybody who wants it if they're interested. But what I would like to see is really secure communication between BGP neighbors. Okay, meaning IPsec. Okay. Making sure that those that are advertising routes have the authority to advertise it. Whether that's done with certificates of authority or we use some other mechanism, I'm not sure. Certificates of authority are already in place. I think that might be the better solution since it's already there and it's understood by some.
Aaron runs the index of who owns what IP ranges, effectively controls the AS, correct? The AS members themselves.
Aaron for this part of the world. Okay, you've got other registries, the other registries in Europe, and
so there's a limited set that everyone considers authoritative, and if they believe you guys know who should be able to issue updates for us.
yeah. So the question is that the authoritative figures who are handing out autonomous system numbers and handing out the routing information should be the ones who are handing out the certificates to make sure that people are who they say they are. And that's really what has to happen. So that's more money that has to be poured into the route registries to make sure they have the ability and the finances to start, supporting that type of system, which will raise up the cost of, getting an address or getting an autonomous system. But it's something we're going to have to do, I think. Good questions. Yes, sir. They do implement filters, but it's difficult to implement filters against your neighbor's neighbors or your neighbor's neighbor's neighbors. You can implement filters against your neighbors, but against people that are a couple hops away that you're supposed to be sending traffic through. Okay, I got to remember to repeat these questions. His question is if you're a transit autonomous system, why is it you can't set filters up with your autonomous system? And again, so. You can against your neighbors in most of the cases, but against your neighbor's neighbors, it becomes much too difficult to implement and maintain filters in that manner. And how do you really know if somebody's modified the autonomous system number in the path somehow as the Bgp update's been sent through their network? Good question. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
He's already evil and already sees the traffic why he's bothering all of their
The question was, why is the person at the evil ISP forwarding traffic somewhere else? The reason why I put that up there is because you can. You don't have to. You could set up your own server right there and watch it right as it came in, and you're done with it. But the fact that the other autonomous systems has to trust the information or has to trust that you're doing the right thing with their traffic as it goes through, I certainly could just watch it right there and send it along its way and be done with it. But it may be an employee who may not have access to put a server in there, but they have access to the routers and they can configure things. Or we remotely own one of the routers in that ISP and want to bring it back to ourselves. Okay? So we don't have access to the physical side of the network there, but we do have access to it remotely. Okay? Which is why I did it that way. But you're certainly right. I could have just put a server in if I was sitting there. Okay? Good question. I haven't checked that. It's a good question. Does anybody know of any lists out there of people who are autonomous systems who aren't filtering right? They're available? Maybe something we should certainly consider putting up, at least for an interim thing. Yes?
Using BGP, can I quickly determine how far away a certain route should be, what the destination should be, without actually making that communication?
Okay, using BGP, is there a way to identify how far away something should be? Not unless you knew it before. Unless you already identified by doing a trace route or doing something, and trace routes even might be unreliable. Well, there's a way I could check by going out to a route registry out on the internet. If the website I use a lot is netconfigs.com. I'll plug their site because it's a really good site. If you go out to their site, you can actually dynamically figure out what your BGP configuration should be by putting in your autonomous system and other autonomous systems and whether you're a peer, what type of connections you are. It'll spit out a basic idea of what your Cisco configuration would look like. It also has a list of a bunch of route servers that are available for user access out on the internet. You could do a show IP BGP from there and see what the AS hops are back to your network or to some other network. If you were to look at that and verify it, and all of a sudden, you were suspecting something was wrong, you could go out there and look at it. Now, what it's not going to tell you is if somebody tunnels the traffic with GRE, as soon as it's tunneled with GRE, it's going to create a gap in there. And that's really only going to be seen if you trace route and all of a sudden realize your traffic jumped from San Jose and all of a sudden ended up in India and started coming back out on the internet in India. That would tend to raise some red flags, but your typical person browsing the internet isn't going to look for things like that. Good question. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that would definitely be useful. And the question was, if you maintained sorry, I got to do that. I'm so used to teaching in a classroom environment that I assume everybody can hear his question. So his statement was, it really wasn't a question, it was a statement, was that if you maintained a black hole list of some kind that actually looked at it, and this is kind of what the route registry database is supposed to do, that we, for the most part, aren't using on a wide scale, is that by identifying what things should be, and all of a sudden seeing something's changing and jumping 20 ASs away, which is a little too far, that something's wrong, and maybe figure something out and block that traffic and black hole that list, black hole that traffic. Okay. To fix it quickly, I'm pessimistic about the ability to fix it quickly because the code isn't out there yet. The routers that need to run this probably don't have enough memory in place to add this, and the infrastructure to support this kind of a system isn't there right now today. And if something on a widespread scale started happening, it would take us, we'd be scrambling to fix it. And I don't think we'd be able to fix it in a day, in 2 days, maybe not even a week. Yeah, his statement was, we know that things like this don't get fixed until they're actually broken. And, you know, are we waiting for the Pearl Harbor attack against, you know, against the internet? Maybe we are. I hate to be pessimistic about it, but I know we have, you know, the positive side of it is we have the ability to fix it today. If we go after it and we, you know, we look at what we have and we fix it today before somebody attacks it, before somebody takes it down. But if we don't take the steps because we're waiting for it to break, then it's our own fault. For knowing that we could fix it, but we didn't.
Interesting question. Are there any non-security related features that people have wanted to see, or people are trying to put into BGP, that perhaps would cause administrators to be willing to upgrade their system to get this new feature? I know, by the way, we'll piggyback on the security system.
The question was, are there any specific features that people are looking for within BGP that haven't been implemented that would be enough to kind of act as a driving force in pushing a secure BGP solution out there? Now, honestly, you kind of hit that question from left field. I hadn't thought about that. What do you think? What do you think? What would you like to see implemented?
I'm just curious, like, are there any inherent inefficiencies in BGP that people, you know, 'cause I don't do BGP, but I
Okay.
think people are like, oh my God, this is terrible.
Um,
Maybe there's one better algorithm we can do.
In all honesty, if you go back to the stuff that Radia Perlman wrote, I mean, she hates BGP. She writes it in her book. She was the one who wrote Spanning Tree, if you guys don't know who Radia Perlman is. She wrote Spanning Tree. She helped write, I believe, ISIS and NLSP for Novell. She thinks BGP is, you know, is horrible. And there could be a much better way to do it, and I tend to agree with her. I mean, really, you know, going back to what I said originally, this is RIP for the internet. Okay? You know, it's a distance vector routing protocol. There are much better ways for us to do it. We've proven it with OSPF. We've proven it with things like EIGRP from Cisco. There's, you know, certainly a better way to do it, but since we've had BGP running, it's stable, why bother, right? I disagree. I think that we could potentially make not only a secure version of BGP, but maybe something that was more on the line of a link state type routing protocol that could operate on a global scale. That would be a difficult, you know, undertaking in itself, but it might, you know, it might serve to, you know, if we could improve the convergence time of the internet. The internet isn't built upon having good convergence time. It's built upon having good scalability, at least with BGP. If we could get the best of both worlds, get good scalability, get security, and get fast convergence times, it might push some of the vendors and the people into doing something like that. Now, how did that happen? You know, it's just conjecture, I guess, at this point.
The problem with CA is never been able to implement a solid CA setup that they really wanted to do or implement on a large scale. How painful is that to do?
Okay, the question is, you know, CAs have had a difficult time being implemented correctly as it sits right now. Why would we go after and use that same solution for BGP? I'm just saying that's what's being suggested. I'm not offering another suggestion than what's out there, but I see your point. I see your point that okay. So the question was that, you know, seen huge financial institutions attempt to implement, you know, certificates of authority, and, you know, a large institution just becomes too cumbersome to work with, and we all know that you know, it's a fine line. If the implementation of security is too cumbersome upon your business, you're not going to do it. You're just going to circumvent it, or you're not going to run it. Agreed? Okay. So again, it goes back to the idea of if we don't find an easy-to-use solution that is also secure, then we're still in that catch-22. Okay? We're still in that situation where we can't solve it because it's too difficult, but we need to solve it because it's too broken. Okay? So we either start putting our heads together and figuring out what to do, or we wait till it breaks. And right now we're waiting till it breaks stage. Okay. Another good question. All right, any others before we wrap it up? Okay, well, thank everybody for coming. If you guys want to